let's, I guess, start with introduction. So you are an expert in AI and how it affects the media industry. Can you maybe talk about your background a bit, and then we'll get into the good stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. I came to this as a journalist, Neil. I've been a journalist now for, would you believe, 40 odd years. Um, and along the way, this was about 2 years ago, I was doing some work for a client. Like many journalists, we wear many hats, and I was then producing a number of media events for high-end corporates. And I was doing some research for somebody, and I delivered the research to my client, and they said, you could have used Google Bard, which was what Gemini was then known as. And, like most journalists on a Zoom call, I scribbled down something and said, must look at Google Bard. That was my first encounter with it and with generative AI. And my first feelings, like many people have, which is this is magical. How on earth does this work? And, then very quickly, this is going to do us all out of our jobs. The more I looked into it, though, the more angry I became. It very, very quickly became apparent that what we all know, which is that these large language models behind the well-known chatbots like Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI, um, ChatGPT, they have been trained on stolen material. They've been trained on the world's intellectual property. They have scooped up, the high techs have scooped up that IP without consent, without any offer of compensation. Um, and now, as previous speakers said, in an act of organized crime, essentially, to create businesses that are the most capitalized companies on earth ever. And yet the
Mhm.
content creator industry, publishers, etc., are going through some very, very hard times. There's some real existential questions around this, and there is a real crisis now around copyright, which I'll very happily explain what I mean by that shortly.
I mean, it's kind of like everything with AI. It's a big topic that has ballooned and ballooned and ballooned, and we could talk about all kinds of things. But is there? I think maybe one place to start is what is the big danger? What is? I mean, there's a lot of dangers, but I mean, I guess that's just kind of taken as given. You say, oh, there's a lot of dangers with AI. We just kind
Yeah,
of say that a lot. But what really is the problem?
I would say that for those most people on this call, those that are involved in the media industry, those that are involved with content creation, those that advise companies, law firms, etc., there are really three big buckets of how it harms. The really big one is how it erodes trust. We heard from Rob earlier there, how it's very difficult now to understand what is real. What do we believe? This is probably going to be one of the biggest questions of our time. Who do we believe, and is it true? What are the sources of genuine provenance and trustworthiness? So it erodes trust by a number of things. The actual inherent models themselves, the technology within the models themselves, the neural networks, the transformer model, they can't help but give an answer to a question. So what they will never do, no chatbot will ever say, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that. They will always have a go based on the corpus of training data that they've been trained on to try and infer an answer. And that's where you get this dreadful anthropomorphic term hallucination comes from. So essentially, the models will have a go and come up with something. They will also obviously invent links, they'll invent citations. Lots of lawyers are getting into trouble about that with made up
Mm.
lawsuits, made up names of plaintiffs and defendants in other cases. But of course, journalists are not immune from this as well. There's been a number of examples where content's been purely created by AI without sufficient human oversight. It's gone straight to air or straight to print, and no one has spotted the mistakes. So it erodes trust, it erodes credibility. It's very hard now to see, on some of the big picture, the photo agency sites such as Adobe Stock. There was a case just before Christmas where the Boston Globe used an image of a skeleton fist to
Mm.
illustrate the story of the shooting of the U.S. Healthcare uh, millionaire in New York. That was an AI generated image showing the bones within a finger sort of floating around a boxing glove and three bones going into the fist itself. Clearly AI generated. It says it's AI generated on the Adobe website, but in 2-point font. If you're in a hurry, you're going to choose that image. So this notion of AI slop again. So after this call, I invite people just to type in the term baby peacock in
Mhm.
Google Images and just see what you see. You'll see the majority of images there are not baby peacocks. They are AI slop, which of course is the web is drowning from. So that's the first big, it erodes trust. Allied to that or linked to that then is it massively damages brand integrity. So, you know, clearly the journalistic mission is based on accuracy and authenticity. So it massively undermines that. The moment you have to issue an apology to say we didn't sufficiently oversee this, we didn't sufficiently check it, that's going to disturb an image of an organization. But it's the individual brand integrity that I focus on and advise people on as well. That when you're using these models, particularly image generators and now the video generators, you are walking into a very, very risky area. You
Mhm.
can very easily be infringing copyright of others because of the way that these models have been trained. You could also be violating the privacy of others as well. We will very soon have some massive scandals where we will start to see the interior of people's homes, things that have been said in quiet, very private moments, which suddenly starts to appear for everyone to see. Because again, everything that's essentially being seen through, the now we've got smart glasses capturing everything and
Mhm.
other devices as well, which is all this material is going in. So yeah, images, identifiable images of our children, etc., will start to go in there. And then the third big area that is obviously of huge concern is that it undermines financial sustainability or
Mhm.
fundamental financial viability. And there's two big areas around this. And that is that search has gone generative. So publishers, news publishers in particular, that are dependent on search for between 30% to half of all of their traffic coming to their sites has come via traditional Google search links. And now with the advent of AI overviews and other search engines that again scrape those publishers' content to create AI generated snippets. Now, they would argue there are links, there are citations, there are links back to the publisher sites, but it's clearly the aim of the AI developers here is to keep you within that Google AI overview environment and not necessarily to hand you on to the publisher. If it was, those links would be nice, big, and fat, and they'd be promoting the publishers and where the content came from. New players into this market like ChatGPT Search and Perplexity in the same bucket as well. Perplexity as well is obviously trying to develop revenue shares with publishers and is talking a good talk, but many publishers don't believe that, and some are actively suing. The one though that so they're the three big things in terms of the industrial things around eroding trust, damaging brand integrity, and undermining sort of financial viability. But the one that we all, no matter what your background is on this call, as citizens of the world, as responsible citizens of the world, we should all be aware of is that the more you use a generative product, particularly a text-based product where you're using it to look up something, you're using it as a quasi search engine, which is not what you should be using these things for.
Mhm.
But as the search engines go generative, you can't really avoid it. The big risk here is that it undermines our critical thinking. Now, this is particularly a concern among younger generations that are now growing up with these generative tools, these generative products. Um, and two big researchers, one last week from MIT Media Lab, again, and there was one a few months ago from Microsoft, similar findings that the more you use this, the less you actually engage in sort of critical thinking. You become dependent essentially. So the headlines are, using AI leads to brain rot. Your brain
Mhm.
will atrophy. Will ultimately all die. Will become so dumb. Will become so stupid. Clearly, that's my profession trying to explain that in a simplified way. But it's true. The more you do use this, the more you're likely to just cut and paste, copy into a generative model into a prompt search field and rely on the results, and you will not check. That's the key problem. The more you use it, the more reliant you become, and the less critical you become of the results. So they're the major areas.
So, lots of questions. Thanks so much for that. I mean, one thing is, I guess the thing that people bring up is like, well, it's just a new technology, right? And Socrates was panicked that people were, writing things down instead of just remembering them, right? Or what if I never use a calculator anymore and I can't do math in my head? Which if I used to be able to do math in my head, but not now. Um, and is it another in terms of the human impact? Is it just another technology that will just get absorbed? We'll just figure it out. Or is it, I guess, another thing? I mean, haven't we been doing that already with nobody reads a physical map anymore. If I have a thought, literally not even I have a question, it's like if I have a thought, I do a Google search about it. And is that right? Is that so? I mean, haven't we been already doing that?
We have, and I am sure that the advent of the movable type printing press and the advent of cheaper books distributed among the populace, people are probably warning about, oh, that person's constantly reading; they're just not getting on with their farming
Hmm.
because they're constantly got their heads in Chaucer's latest bestseller, etc., but or Shakespeare's bestseller. But this is different. This is something where the actual technology is unreliable. So yes, to take your example, you would be using a map, and now you are then happily using Google Maps. If you try to use generative AI to generate a map, good luck to you. It has, for some reason, it cannot create and draw maps which are anywhere near reliable as good old-fashioned, obviously printed books, but also printed maps, but also Google Maps and Apple Maps. Now, there's a very good reason for this. And that is that it's another inherent um, weakness of the technology itself, and that is that an AI model has never actually walked around like a human being, has no concept of what it is to walk west where the sun is likely to set in the northern hemisphere. It's got no concept that if you walk south, then you're walking in the opposite direction of walking north. It's got no concept of gravity. It's got no concept of wind, rain, all the other things that we just know innately almost, or from a very young age we learn. And this is the concept of a world model, that the large language models have an alternative. So the alternative to the just purely pattern spotting and generating responses or outputs based purely on probability. That's how all this stuff works. And it's largely language based. That models are actually trained more on video, more on 3D video. It actually builds up a worldview of its environment, and it learns by navigating its way through the world as we do as very young children, as toddlers. And we learn that when we drop something, there's going to be a cause and effect. Um, Now, this is um, the route which has been taken by Jan LeCun at Meta and various other advocates of this world view or world model approach. It's got a lot going for it. The problem is that the large AI developers have sunk so much money into the transformer model. And because they're just using brute force, this massive computational power and the world's data, the world's training data, it's sort of reliable up to a point. But when you actually assess the unreliability, a model which is 10 to 20% unreliable, which is what most of them are, even if it was just 1% unreliable, the scale that this technology is being used at, it means that you cannot rely on the answer. So yes, we have been through these huge seismic shifts before in humans adapting to technology, but now we're being asked to adapt to something which is unreliable. And I think that is fundamentally unethical.
Is it so? Are Meta's glasses that I saw Zuckerberg with on there? Is that really just to train to give those models a chance to walk around in the real world? Is that really what those are for? Everybody wear
Well,
these, go walk around to train our AIs.
yeah, huge privacy issues, huge privacy issues. So they say that when they're actually being used for that they're not using the inputs as a source to train video models. But elsewhere, all the AI companies will say that they will use whatever interaction you have with an AI model, they'll use that to improve the model. So therein lies something for the lawyers to look at. But it's far beyond me to even suspect, that is a workaround, but it sounds very much like it. Those in various territories where privacy is taken a lot more seriously, of course, those glasses are still they're not really able to launch those in a fully functioning manner. But let's just accept that at some stage they will be. And let's assume that at some stage, the experiment that two Harvard students did last year, were using an open source patch, they were very easily able to actually come up with a face detection. So they basically, as you're walking, there's a brilliant video of these guys doing it. If you just Google Harvard students, found it easy to use Meta Ray-Bans to spy on people. Um,
Mm,
as they're walking down the road, or very, very disturbingly on the Boston Metro on the tube, these students were going up to somebody, and you see these poor human beings basically saying to the answer, "Oh, hi, I think I know you. You're so and so,"
mm,
and
mm,
the human reaction is say, "Well, yes, I think we have met, haven't we?" And of course, they're just grabbing all this information from social media, and it's they can see it. They can see who people are. So as I say on stage, whenever I show this video clip, not a product, but it could be very soon. And
mm,
who's to say that someone scrupulous vendor or somewhere in the world is actually going to do that? And then suddenly, as we get used to that, that becomes a thing, and then the AI developers develop it, and people say, "Well, get over it." It's actually quite
mm.
fun. And this is the problem that we're going through. It's just not taken seriously enough.
So the in terms of its impact on Hollywood or content creation, um, there is that it's what we've heard today that I need to get 1,000 1,000 articles out to all these publications if I'm hoping to make the rent, if I'm a PR agency or whatever it is, that there's this sort of this need for scale and this sort of pressure uh, about money. And so, if I'm making a movie and I can really get rid of a whole bunch of people and cut big chunks of cost, and I have to do AI to do that, and get a lower place in heaven, I'm probably going to do that. So what is your
Yes.
sense of, like, I guess, in terms of the where people stand on that, say at the studios or in terms of content creation? Is there a thing of like, nah, we're just going to get rid of all the real people and we're just going to do AI, or are there people who like think that's not really going to work, or what's the temperature?
Yeah. I mean, within Hollywood itself, I mean, there's very good reasons why OpenAI's Sora has not taken off within Hollywood. There are signs that Google's VO3, its latest model, which incredibly matches speech audio, perfectly lip synced to outputs. Meta's got a product coming out very soon called Meta Movie Gen, which supposedly does the same thing. It's the fact that these models have been trained on, unlicensed material. It's been trained on content without consent of those that have found their content actually going to it. Um, and that those, Hollywood would be, a studio using that could be very, very easily, unknowingly absorbing frames or sequences of frames from a rival studio, and immediately there'd be a copyright infringement suit. However, and let's take a couple of steps back. What I'm not saying is that AI doesn't have a use. Of course it does. It can be massively beneficial to all of us in media. It, its uses in pattern spotting and summarization and helping to suggest a structure. All of that, all great, great stuff. It's this area around the how it's trained. Um, there are alternatives. There are ethically trained alternatives to everything that we talk about. So, in the case of a video generator, there's a video generator in the US called Moon Valley, I think it's called, which has been trained on licensed material. There are music ethically trained music generators. You don't have to go to Suno or Udio, now being sued by the US record labels who also want to do deals with them and potentially own them as well. So there is an alternative, and the body of the work that I do at Charting Gen AI, my own newsletter, is really to remind people that this could have been done properly 3 or 4 years ago, at the absolute dawn of all of this. But the AI companies just didn't even think to go about it in a legitimate way. They just took and stole and didn't ask. And we're in this situation now where the world's IP is at stake. Generative models do compete against its training data, and that's the key issue. Whether or not we, as a sort of collective series of societies, take this seriously enough to actually do something about this from a legislative point of view, from a political point of view, is yet to be seen. That there's a big issue around that in terms of how governments are reacting to this, and it's been pretty supine. And the reason why is
Mhm.
that this feeling that we mustn't do anything to annoy the high techs because of close proximity between Silicon Valley now and the Trump administration, and the worry that by overly criticizing or being seen to even have um, copyright laws, or indeed in the case of Europe, the Europe's AI Act, there's a lot of feelings that, well, maybe the AI Act went too far, and we're having to sort of slightly backtrack on that. And here in the UK, certainly a government that is put so much store on double-digit growth, if it can possibly achieve that, and seeing technology and AI within that helping to achieve that, that governments are doing everything they possibly can, as I say, to not annoy the high techs, to
Mhm.
basically go along with this idea that this is a miracle cure to economic woe. I think they're wrong. I cannot see why you would need McCartney's entire archive to find a cure for cancer. This is always always the defense. We need everything. We need absolutely everything to train these models. Well, no, you don't. There's a lot of research out to say that you don't need to scrape the world's entire corpus of human creativity. You just need enough, and it's debatable what enough is, but there's enough research studies to show that it can be done.
Mhm. Is it? We'll just wrap up here in a sec, but I guess is there a confusion in? I mean, is it? People talk about the Turing test, and one of my moments of clarity was when I realized that the Turing test is not a test of how clever the AI is. It's a test of like how at what point can I be fooled. Um, and I wonder if AI is or Gen AI, the whole project is a magic trick project, so that it's a puppet doing something that you're told is doing something, but it's not really doing what you're being told it's doing. You kind of go, oh, well, it's amazing. It does all these things, and it's kind of not really doing what it appears to be doing. And so, is there a um, are there two questions about like the technology versus kind of what's the sales pitch we're living in?
Yep, you're absolutely right, and you put your finger on a very, very important topic, which is this thing genuinely intelligent? Should we be calling generative AI? And by that, as you did as well, know the distinction pre ChatGPT, classic AI, or predictive or deterministic AI, the type of AI we were all using in our digital watches, digital phones, Netflix recommendations, that sort of stuff, highly dependable. It was based on if you like this, then you might like this. So known outcomes. The moment you then start to ask these models to create content based purely on probability and having just purely looked at spotting patterns, and the fact that they're called large language models for a reason. It's largely text and language that these models are being trained on, and the most powerful use cases are when they start to speak to us. Now, you're absolutely right. What they're not doing is speaking at the level of a sentient human being. They are not in any way doing that. They have not moved on from the ELIZA experiment from 1965. where an early chatbot demonstration showed that so language like sort of a therapist would use, where someone would say, I'm not feeling too good today, and the chatbot would respond, "Tell me about your day." And the person would say, "Well, I'm having problems with a relationship. Tell me about your relationship." They just pick on a word and it'd turn that into a question. And if it became specific, then the bot would then do something very, very different. Say, well, how far did you come to come here today? Again, and in that experiment in 1965, the guy who actually came up with that actually closed the experiment because he was so worried that the majority of human beings that engaged with ELIZA actually thought they were engaging with a live human being. And many people using ChatGPT today feel the same way. And a vast cohort of young, lonely, mainly male teenagers in America also feel the same way as they're interacting with character AI. The app that is involved in a lawsuit where a mother is suing character AI and its principal financier, Google, over the death by suicide of her son, who thought he was in a deep relationship with Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
Tragic case. It's not a one-off by any means, but it's back to that point that you said before. There's a human frailty and a human vulnerability. We are lulled into believing that something that can use language is inherently intelligent. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. It's mimicking language, but we ascribe intelligence to this, and we need. Other speakers have mentioned this before in this brilliant event today. We need to have a public information campaign. We need to get across to politicians more than anybody else that there is no underlying intelligence in these models. It is purely mimicking our language. It's mimicking what it thinks. Sorry, here I am doing the same thing. It doesn't think. It's very easy to fall into these anthropomorphic traps, isn't it? But it's generating these outputs based purely on the training data, based on the prompt that you give it, that this output is going to be plausibly correct, that this word will follow another word, and that sort of thing. Plus some nifty fiddlings in the system as well, to make this thing look and sound ever more human. And this is a dangerous, very, very dangerous slippery slope.
Amazing. All right. Well, we're going to have to end that there, but we're going to all jump on to our final chat and where we're going to solve all the problems. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Graham.
Pleasure.